Yo, it's TF, we're back. We're working on the J12 today. What we're going to do right now is show you how to take apart the valve section and show you how to tech that. It's pretty simple, but there are some few steps to get there. So we've got Bullet Bill to help us here. We need some more bullets, Bill. He's going to help us take apart the valve. We've got a couple, always got guests on our shows. So first thing we're going to want to do is make sure that the marker is degassed, especially if we're going to go into the valve. Okay. So how to do that on a Chipley is you simply unscrew this until you hear the magic sound. That's good. So we can unscrew the tank. That means it's been degassed from here, and I want to make sure that it's also clear here. So, you know, I'm going to check down to see if there's any paint in there. I'm going to take the bolt out and look down there and make sure that there's no paint. And I'll double check that myself. There is no paint. And then I'll fire it once or twice. Nothing. So barrel comes off at that point, and I know that I'm safe to work on this marker. Always wear eye protection. And of course, ASTM certified eye protection is your goggles. So if you want to throw your goggles on while you're working on it, it's just good practice and good habit to do so. Protect your eyes. Be safe out there. I'm not liable for anything you do. This is not to be seen as professional advice. Anyway, we're gonna take off the grip frame real quick. We did that in a previous video. So we're not gonna tech it. We're gonna take it apart and just take it off. It's very, very simple, and so you don't have to mess with the external AT anymore. Because you don't have to mess with the external auto trigger, it's easy for me on the video to just show it come right off, and we're just gonna set it aside. Here. Take these two screws off just to make life easier. Now, what we've got underneath here to take apart the front block, and again, I said this in other videos, but we're going to work on the gun mostly upside down. So just get, like I said, get used to holding the gun sort of like this, upside down. Okay. What we need to do is take this front block. I'll call it that, although it's almost a little bit of a misnomer because the front block on a autococker is what holds all the pneumatics on it, but I'll call this a front block. We're going to take this 5/32 valve retention screw out. This used to hold in just the valve body on the old CCM markers. You need a special tool coming from the back, but what this does now is it holds in the whole valve assembly. Actually, before that, we need to take the bolt out. So that's just a quarter turn. Bolt comes out, done. Okay? We're going to turn that 90 degrees to the side. All right? And so it's like that. Now, we'll use the 5/32. And as soon as we loosen this up, what you're going to see is this front block is going to move forward. It's under slight spring pressure. Nothing big. It's not going to shoot forward, but it's going to come forward. And then now that we've got this turned 90 degrees, the whole valve assembly is going to come out. All right? So what you've got left then is the hammer, IVG, which is internal to the hammer, and the spring left in here, and probably the detent O-ring, actually that was taken out earlier, which is going to be in there. Okay? And then you've got this assembly sitting in front of you. So I'm going to set this body aside just for now, and we're going to take apart that. So two Allen keys, a 1/8 and a 5/32 thus far, to get to this far. We're going to push this back. Okay, so again, working with it upside down. We push this back and hold it with our thumb, or whatever else, however else you're going to hold it, right? And then separate these two slightly with your fingers, and then turn this back block off. You just want to separate those just enough because it will tap that. I don't think it will do any damage, but it, you know, it could mar your anodizing. So we'll set that aside. Then your pump comes off. Okay? Now we're going to set the valve aside for just a second. There are two 1/8 inch screws here in case you really want it to clean. That's the return spring that I just dumped out. I think it's set over here. Make sure you keep that separate. That's a standard return spring, but it's been clipped by rod from the factory to be proper. If you have to take this apart, you'd have to have something really dirty to take this apart. But you know, if you have to, a couple of screws. You don't want to over tighten these on putting this back in. It's going back into Delrin. So it's, you know, you don't want to over tighten, but a couple of screws and that'll come right out for you. What I really like here is that they submerge this plate fully. You can see that, how they submerge that. And that's just a really strong attachment. Well done. And then where that screws in, they submerge that even further. It's kind of indexed in a way. So one more screw here. And you'll be able to take this apart. This one's been a little bit tight, but that's good. It's not a big deal. A little bit of blue Loctite putting these back together wouldn't be silly because it's not like you're going to take these apart a lot. And this just comes off. You see how that plate is completely recessed like that? And that pump plate is like that. Now, the reality is this is set from the factory. It's set in a jig and it's set right. Once you've got it, you've got it. This length determines, this length here on this rod determines where the auto trigger trips. It's set from the factory. You do not need to set the auto trigger on this marker. Once it's set, you're done. If you wanted to, I would polish this rod up and I would polish that rod up. That one's running on they're both running through this front block, okay, as sort of guide rods, which is really cool. But I'd polish those up before I put them back together. You can do that every now and again, no big deal. Wouldn't mess with these, set it aside. Okay, that's the pump. Now, what you've got left is the valve assembly and the front guide rod. In order to take that valve assembly apart, you need a 3/16 Allen key to take off this pump guide rod. Okay, it's got an O-ring, so set it aside. And then that's not what I wanted to do, but that's fine if that valve comes out. Valve pin, I should say, and return spring. And this sleeve comes out here. Now, inside this block is an O-ring. Let me set this up. Is an O-ring. So if you have a pick, you can actually use your finger, but you know, you lightly get that O-ring out. And that O-ring is what seals this valve. So it sits like this. Where'd it go? Pause. So that thing sits like this when it's in this front block. Of course, that's not how you put it back together, but we set that aside. Just inspect it, check it, make sure it's not nicked or, you know, bruised, fold, spindled, or mutilated, and you're going to be good to go. Now, I wouldn't do this real often because it's just not necessary, but in here is your valve body, okay? So what you can do is use your, if that ever leaked, is use this valve tool to loosen this up. It's very lightly put in there, okay? Drop that down. And then push that out from the back using a dowel or something else. And that comes out here. And again, I cannot imagine when that would need to go on. What you've got is this one O-ring then that is static and doesn't move. Now, you now have a pass-through, complete pass-through here. And if you've got a nice clean swab that's small enough, or what I always end up doing is just, you know, using a rag and twisting it around until it gets deep enough, or long-handled Q-tips or whatever it is. But once you've gotten it apart, you can see now that I'm getting that rag almost all the way through there, getting it completely clean. I might even grab my pick and pull that through. Then I know I'm for sure got the inside that's completely clean, okay? Now, when putting this back together, you have to make sure that the holes line up. So what you've got is this hole here. This is your valve assembly without the spring, okay? When this gun fires, the hammer strikes this, opens this valve, air comes through here, that's been regulated, up through here, through this hole, through the bolt hole, which turns a corner and pushes the paintball out the barrel. Okay, so you got to make sure all your holes line up, or no air come out, and no air come out, no bueno. So a little bit of hater sauce marmalade, Dow 33 would be fine in this application. I'm not going to use a ton. This O-ring is going to be, again, it doesn't move, it's static. Normally these don't go bad on standard sniper platforms, and they surely aren't going to go bad on this. The only thing you've got to worry about is lining up the holes when you put it back together. So you drop that in, and then I like to do something like this. Take a 3/16 so I know I've got that lined up. Drop this in to tighten it. Now I'm not putting any force on this. I'm just allowing that to hold its place while I tighten this down, okay? So no force, just snugging that up. And then you can see that has jumped off a little bit. And this is also part of the reason why I would not mess with this that much. It's just not necessary. But if that has jumped off a little bit, you kind of tweak it back with an Allen key or loosen this back up slightly so that you can move it back into place. Now we got it completely lined up, and then we're going to tighten that back down. Now what I might do is grab this front block to have just a little more purchase, okay, and then snug that up. Making sure, oh look at there, the hole jumped off again. And again, this is why I wouldn't do this, but you know, for the sake of the video, and I'm glad this is sort of happening on video, you can see the reason for doing what we're doing here. Leave that snugged and snug this up here. I guess I'll add a little bit of force, lateral force on that. Not much. Let's see how we did. Pretty good, pretty good. I wanted to pause it there so I could grab some Q-tips just to make sure that once I got it reassembled, everything is perfectly clean and smooth in there. If you are having trouble putting this back in aligned, grab a 7/32 Allen key and drop it down there. Hold it again very loosely. That should keep it pretty much aligned, and then tighten that down. I found that works pretty well. So we can set that aside and now. And again, that's your valve. And what I'll do now is I'll reassemble this, and then we'll go into the regulator in a different video. So that's just in case you needed to repair just the valve. So you grab some marmalade on this O-ring, and it drops in, and there's actually a second step that it sits down in, okay? So you want to drop it in and don't want to let it sit up on that first step. That's not where it goes. It gets tucked in down one more level. So push that down in. That actually side went down a little too far. There we go. Now it's sitting on the bottom level. Then you're ready to put this back in. And again, this is indexed. You've got two flats here that fit the two flats on the side. Now technically, you can put it in upside down. Of course, your air patches then is completely occluded and you'll be blowing air out the bottom. So don't do that, okay? Put it back in like so. Of course, the first thing you want to do is put in your valve pin. Now, I run the valve pin seal, the cup seal as it used to be called, although it's not a cup seal anymore, it's just an O-ring. I run that dry. If you ever have a problem with a leak down the barrel that you can't fix by just adjusting air to add a little bit of lubrication, you can replace the pin the O-ring on that pin. And how you do that is you take a 1/16 Allen key and loosen this up. That will unscrew and it will come apart, and you will have an O-ring in there. And that O-ring will be like so. So you simply replace that around there, screw it all back together, tighten that screw down, and you're good to go. I can't imagine that you would have to redo that very often. Now, if you do have a polishing wheel, I would polish up this valve pin. Although from the factory it comes very nice. It's just if it gets sort of screwed up, in play. So you can take that apart if you need to, if you're ever leaking down there. Run it dry. It drops back in here. Use the spring to guide it back into the hole. And that can be a little bit of a trick, but just a little time and it will go boop right back in. And then this goes back in here. And it should go in with a little bit of tension because it is going over an O-ring. Now, once you've got that done, you're going to put this back together, okay? You've got this O-ring that sort of sits like this. That's a static O-ring too, but it does need to seal. You drop this in fairly straight up and down because there's a lip milled in right here that spring fits on. So you drop this in here like so and tighten it down, and it uses a 3/16 O-ring to tighten down. Now once you've got that done, your valve assembly is back together. Then it's just a matter of putting the pump back together with the 1/8" screws, and you're pretty much back to where we had things before. There, just snugged up is all you need with those. Drop the return spring in if you want a return spring. This is the first marker I leave the return spring in. That's saying something for me because I hate return springs. But it works on this gun. Again, separate that with your 2 fingers. Put this back block back on. And that's a smaller thread than you're used to, so be a little careful with it. And put that back together as such. And then you're going to turn that at 90 degrees and set it down. The one thing that has to go back in now is the detent. Now it's not a detent, but it acts as one. It's an O-ring. And that O-ring drops into a slot that looks just like this inside the body. Okay, so that's back in there. And then this goes back on. Now, we're turning this back upside down. We've got this turned 90 degrees. It's going to seem like you need a lot of hands, but you really don't. And so you got you got 2 assemblies here, right? This pin goes in here. Okay? And then you'll see this little pin right here on the front block that I haven't shown you before. You'll see this pin right here. There, now you can see it. That it indexes in and locks into place. Really cool. Then to get that to hold for temporarily, you just put that there and put the bolt back in. Okay? So that's now there. No, it's not tight, obviously. So put this back together. Okay? And then take this last screw, grub screw, 5/32, and tighten it down. Now, make sure this is all the way to the rear. You want that back and held tight as you're tightening this down. You want that to go in smoothly. All it's doing is holding that valve in place and locking down like that. And then, if you want to put the grip frame back on, it's just a matter of these 2 screws and tightening them down. So that's pretty much it for this video. That just got us into the valve, broke the valve down. You're used to seeing the valve components from other markers if you're a CCM user. So it's not like that, is necessary. If you want to go further into the valve, you can look at some of the other videos that go into the valve. But that's basically it, and that's disassembly and reassembly of a valve problem. Again, the only time you'd want to get into the valve is if you were leaking down the barrel. And you would hear it down the barrel here leaking. Other than that, if it's leaking out the front, you might take that front O-ring out. If it's leaking in between, you might have a problem with that the valve body O-ring in there. Those are rarely going to have trouble. And frankly, I replace a cup seal, maybe every year or so. I just rarely have trouble with that too. So if you keep your marker clean and you keep it maintained, it's gonna be fine for a long time. This is just in case you do have problems. All right, keep on watching other videos. We will go into the hammer next. Thanks.